Welcome to the REITE Club podcast, where the focus is on helping you, the real estate investor, advance to the next level. And now let's join this week's hosts and share ways for you to customize your life.
How old were you? I'm just going to ask you, how old were you when you started? Let's
21.
21.
Yeah.
So it is possible at 21 to start, because I think a lot of people think, I have to. I mean, you did save up some money, and but I guess the moral of the story is you don't have to wait until you're 31 or 41 or 51.
Yes.
Do it, right?
Oh, 100%. And to be honest, that first property was a really unique experience for me because it was very challenging. You know, obviously there's a difference in prices now, and a lot of people just you always get the feedback that, it was a lot cheaper in that market back then. But to be honest, I mean, I thought I did everything right. You know, I had a realtor, we had conditions on the property, I was able to waive my financing. And then about a month before I was supposed to close on the property, the woman I was working with from TD had just basically wrote to me and said, I'm sorry, I can't do this deal, and just completely ghosted me. And I'm 21 and I didn't have anyone in my family to help guide me in that scenario. So I just thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose all of my initial investment in this property. And, you know, after being on your own at 17 and working up for that was all of my life savings. That just wasn't an option. So I was able to find a mobile mortgage broker. And basically they came up with, I got the deal through, at the time, I think it was Home Trust. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second, but it was a first and a second mortgage and a line of credit. And for me, that was really mind-boggling, because I thought, okay, well, they're not going to qualify me for less debt essentially and a cheaper rate, but they're going to give me a first and second mortgage and a line of credit to get creative financing to just acquire this property. And it was scary, but I thought, okay, it's 1 year. I had to, I'll rent it out, and because they weren't even counting any rental income, and that actually covered a good chunk of the expenses. So I was able to still manage okay. And then the following year I was able to refinance. So I guess the point being, to your point, I do meet a lot of people that I think for me, being so young was actually an advantage, because I probably just didn't know any better. And I created the situation where I had to move forward with it, right? Otherwise I would have lost everything. So it wasn't really an option to say, no, this isn't going to work, or to look for the perfect opportunity. I just kind of, it's like, I saw recently somebody was talking about a book that they're reading. I think it's instead of ready, aim, fire, it was like ready, fire, aim. And I loved that message, right? Because being so young, I just kind of went for it, versus I find that a lot of people make the mistake where they want to have certain things in place first, and you just don't know what you don't know. And I find in a lot of cases people just don't get started, because then they just come up with more reasons as to why it's not the right time, or it's not the perfect scenario. And I'm going to be 32 this year, and like I was saying on that podcast before, I think the biggest, most valuable skill that I've learned is that regardless of what comes up at this point, I truly believe that I can find a solution to handle it, and I think a lot of people don't want to rip off that Band-Aid, but I think that's your absolute number one skill in real estate, because stuff's always going to come up. Anything unexpected is always going to come up.
I love it. And at 32, you've already had a bit of a rebirth, I guess you could say. So you had your initial portfolio, then you had to let it go, restart. Sorry, I know it's probably a bit painful, but again, you were able to leverage that experience at 21, that scary moment. I'm sure you kind of knew, okay, well, I have resources, there's ways out of this. So can you walk us through restarting? Because you were kind of successful, and now you're a lot more successful, but still, that's kind of a scary moment, a turning point.
Yeah, it's a great point. So I guess I would have, my birthday is later in the year. So it was in 2017, I would have been 26 when my ex and I split up. And yeah, that was hard for a number of reasons. I mean, nobody, I know you guys listen to their podcast, but I was previously married. And it was hard for a number of reasons, right? It's also, my parents went through a pretty nasty divorce. And for me, it was very important to not follow the same path. And so it was very just disappointing, but it's not a reason to stay in something that's not working for either of us. It's not really fair. But the interesting thing, I think the thing that actually hit me the hardest, to be honest, was that I felt that real estate had become a bit of my identity. It was the thing that I loved to do. It was something unique. I had all these wonderful experiences where I got to learn. And especially in that same year, it's funny because I've been actually reflecting on this recently, but I also work in tech, and at the office in that year, unfortunately, there was a death, and somebody had decided to take his own life. And unfortunately, I was there and I witnessed it. And I think, honestly, that really changed my perspective about being in a 9 to 5, being in tech. And I do enjoy parts of my job, and I'm still working in tech, but that I think I mentioned this because that was a big part of my identity, you know, kind of going through school and getting into research and then getting into tech. Was very proud of that. I had my own published research. It was a big part of my identity. And then when this happened, and you know, it was at IBM, and we all kind of classify ourselves as IBMers. So it's a bit of like a family atmosphere, right? Environment. And to lose an IBMer, like to lose a part of your family. And I just felt at the time that the leadership, they're no longer there. So I think it's safe to say this, but they just didn't handle it very well. You know, they kind of put the blame back on the person. And so there was mental health issues. And for me, it was really hard, right? Because then I felt like, okay, maybe I'm not a part of this family. Maybe I'm a little bit more of a number. And that's when I really just doubled down on real estate's my thing, you know? And so much so that a lot of my friends will kind of tease me and call me real estate Bex. So I guess I mention all this because basically for me, I just needed to rebuild as quickly as possible. I wanted to learn from my previous mistakes, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to build a portfolio that would be later torn down again. But at the same time, I knew that for myself, regardless of who I was with or what I was doing, I was going to rebuild my portfolio. So yeah, it's funny because I actually I listened back to my podcast with Nick and Tom just to kind of remember what we had talked about, just to prep for this as well. And it was I guess the point being that, you know, Nick had said it's impressive because you're rebuilding at such a difference in price, right? But for me, it wasn't even an option, and especially because I just analyze all the deals, right? So at the end of the day, to be honest, I don't even really focus on the price tag of the property so much. It's like, what can I qualify for? How do I get this next property? And what's cash flowing? So to rebuild, and I think it is a really important point for your listeners as well, because it does go back to, you know, a lot of, again, I get feedback from people saying, oh, well, when you started, prices were a lot less expensive. But I did go through a period where it was a bit of a sticker shock because it was just a lot more expensive. But I think if you just take that step back and, you know, kind of see the forest through the trees and just focus on your numbers again, ultimately, we're not really buying on appreciation or the property prices. We're buying for that cash flow because that's, you know, where you get security, and that's where you get your freedom, because that's your passive income. So those were my experiences and my lessons learned from that. And honestly, I'm really grateful for the experience, because like I said, it was tough for a lot of reasons, but at the same time, I know that if you know, God forbid, if I had to start over, it's a lot less scary now. You kind of just start to roll with the punches, and it makes you stronger. So it all worked out.
So I'm curious. I mean, you started at 21 and you're now 32. So that's, you know, well over 10 years.
Yeah.
How did you learn? Because I think a lot of people, and I would like to know, because we're not born, nobody is born knowing how to do real estate. And I put do,
Yeah.
in, you know, quotation marks. Nobody's born knowing how to do that. And there is often, well, I think for Danielle and myself and what we've done in our businesses, there can be a really steep learning curve. And I don't care whether you go to take courses or whatever, work with mentors, there's still a steep learning curve. Like that's just the way it is. So how did you navigate that at the beginning? Because like what did you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I think I just kind of took it one step at a time. It's funny because my background's in economics and finance, and I'm kind of laughing because I have a friend was visiting we also used to work in tech together, and we caught up with a couple of other engineers last night, and we were just talking about my friends going back to school. So we were kind of talking about that and being in academia, and we were talking about our degrees. And to be honest, I really value economics and that part of my degree. I felt like I learned a lot, and being able to navigate what's happening now with our economic climate. But for me personally, I actually made the comment that I felt that I didn't really learn anything from the finance part of my degree. I have a minor in finance, and I felt that I was learning it on my own, being in properties before I was taking accounting, or I actually took a class on real estate investments, I think in my, fourth or maybe fifth year. So I'd already been a couple of years into real estate investing. And to be honest, I felt like the theory wasn't even really that applicable compared to what I'd already learned, kind of being boots on the ground. And when I reflect back on that, I think for me, I was very financially focused because when I was on my own, when I was 17, it was already, you're very maniacally focused almost on your income and like your cash inflows and your cash outflows, and budgeting for what bills are coming out. Am I going to have enough money to be able to pay for everything? And for me, and I guess it kind of plays into getting that first property.
Thanks for listening to the REITE Club podcast, where the focus is on helping all levels of real estate investors advance to the next level and help you customize your life. Be sure to tune in next week at reiteclub.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you get a few seconds, please rate the podcast wherever you're listening. It helps the show get noticed by others like you, and we truly appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe.